M. The Media Project. The Vermont Technology Alliance. The VTTA is the only statewide organization focused on Vermont's tech business sector and entrepreneurs. Our business members are Fortune 500 companies, startup founders, small business owners, and soloists. We provide advocacy, recruiting of tech talent, events, and other networking opportunities. We are the heart of the tech ecosystem in Vermont. Become a member now at vtta.org. The Vermont Technology Alliance. Tech thrives here.
I'm your host, Scott Graves, and tonight we are back in yet another chapter in our ongoing storytelling on housing, all things housing, not just the housing crisis, but what we like to talk a lot about here at the podcast are a variety of different perspectives on solutions to what's going on with the lack of housing here in the United States. And I'm joined tonight by my good friend, Mike Zebrowski, who is the founder of Vermont startup Upend This. Right there on his homepage, it says, "Can Vermont-made microhomes upend the affordable housing crisis?" And Upend This is intending to do that. Mike, I'm so glad that you can join us this evening.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So there you are up in Johnson, Vermont, and I just want to start off by saying, we're really glad to hear that. Of course, this is not like the floods of 2023, but we did have a little flooding up near you last night. And for those listeners all over the country that know anything about Vermont in the last year and a half, it's getting wet here. So I'm just really glad to hear you guys are safe and sound, that the business is safe and sound, and we're all struggling with this, right? It's just adding yet another dimension to the housing crisis here in the great state of Vermont.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. And yes, luckily we are currently being spared, but it's a slow creep, so you never know.
So talk to us right away. Let's go right on into it. Your form of housing, right? What role is it going to play in offering a solution to the housing crisis? What's your target? And then as we progress here, I'm just interested to know how you got into this.
Sure. Well, I'll just go back a little bit with what I founded the company on. And truly, we were kind of looking at the accessory building market. So we were looking at a lot of potential for office space, studio space, guest bedrooms. And once we got through the pandemic, obviously as your podcast and a lot of other things out in our world are sending out the alarm is what about housing? So about a year and a half ago, we started looking more steadily at how our units could move from the accessory building sphere and into a livable year-round module. And so to date, we really are going after a accessory dwelling unit market, employee housing, temporary housing, hospitality. So we're essentially kind of looking at this market that is much more about bringing affordable housing accommodations for various different purposes for commercial, municipal, and also residential customers.
Right. And, I will let our listeners know I had a chance recently to come to Johnson, Vermont. You're located in Johnson, Vermont, which is just north of Stowe in north central Vermont, Lamoille County. I know I say that wrong. I'm French Canadian. It's Lamoille. I know it's like so mispronounced. Come on, Vermont. But at any rate, and had a chance to see, the units, regardless of which unit you're building. I have to say, like my first impression as a guy who's a developer and works around a lot of different builders, they're kind of built in plain English like a brick shit house, extremely well designed. They're essentially a piece of furniture. Like there's joinery involved that I've noticed. The previous city I lived in for 18 years was a furniture making center of the United States. So like there's like joinery in there. Talk a little bit about that process before we get to anything else, because people should
Sure.
know that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of the coat hook that we hang our hat and coat and scarf and everything on for the business is essentially the idea that um, we are making an attempt to design, build, and manufacture buildings more like the auto industry builds cars. So we use CNC routing technology. We have our own CNC router in our production space. And we use this essentially to cut parts out of sheet goods, so various sheet goods that we use. And then those are assembled into panel components. And then our panel components are then assembled into units. So we don't do any traditional carpentry. A lot of the details and the way that I've designed things actually minimize the amount of traditional carpentry that would be necessary in terms of finish. And the whole point of this is to essentially make a higher quality yet more affordable living space. And go ahead.
I was going to say the other advantage is in rural places, in particular rural markets like Vermont, other parts of rural the U.S., labor in the trades is a particular acute issue, right? So this also allows you some flexibility. I find it interesting, and it makes perfect sense. A lot of the guys that you're looking for aren't necessarily traditional framers, traditional carpenters, but line cooks and the like make really good employees for you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, really anyone that has an interest in putting anything together and can understand process and can understand attention to detail. So it can be folks that are, haven't even held a screw gun in their life. I mean, this can be a very much on the job, jump right in, learn how to do it, and go. And so yeah, that's a big part of the affordability aspect, but also, as you're saying, bringing good jobs to Vermonters, and a big thrust of what we're doing for sure.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm interested in your one of your target markets, of course, is people that want to rent out units for short term, right? I'm interested to know what you think about just the general, especially in a place like Vermont, the short term rental market, right? Because what is your general take on that? Obviously, it's good, it's supportive, it's a target market for you. There's some people and I should say, some places in Vermont, right, where short-term rentals have having a deleterious effect on the general rental market, right, or the home market, and yet it's essential to other parts. And I'm just wondering what your general take is on that, and how you see that. Do you consider that to be a major part of the future market share for Upend this?
Yeah, I think, generally I see it in the case of being part of our problem for sure, especially in Vermont, where we do have a flood of, folks listing things on Airbnbs, you know, being able to say I can rent, 2 weekends out of a month and I actually make more than what I would get for a month to month rent or a termed lease rental. So I do feel generally that is a part of our problem. I do know that there have been some programs that have limited, access to funds based on if you were going to, short-term rent.
Right.
So I think, the state's starting to look at some ways of safeguarding more of that. In terms of our young business, that market's been important. The struggles we see with, and maybe we can kind of get around to this, is how to finance our units for a residential buyer.
Yeah.
Not so much a commercial buyer, but our commercial buyers have actually been more ready to kind of up and go with our product. And those have been in the sphere of hospitality, Airbnbs, and or hotel rooms. So I think in terms of it's supporting our company and our company kind of looking for that share of the market, I think we'll continue to do that. But I think more and more we press into the sphere of temporary housing, whether it's through municipalities or corporations, larger companies that are looking to create workforce housing. And then the possibility of developer based or a more robust kind of residential customer base. I think we will see ourselves shifting more consistently in that direction, because it really is our mission. Our mission is to have people living in these things, and digging in and making a run of it.
Yeah, it sounds like too. It's not just young people that want to live in a tiny home. That's your future market. It is literally anybody, right? Because I think increasingly more and more with the instability of housing in general. It used to be you had these key moments of transition in your life where you're going to transition from one form of housing to another, and that was relatively predictable. Now people are still having the need of those transitions, right? but there's no inventory, right? So you might be in the 55 plus category and you need to downsize, but if you want to downsize and age in place, that simply put may not be an option, whether that be financially or both financially and physically. It's impossible, and so you start to think about a wider vernacular of housing options if it exists, if it could exist for just such a transition, right? Because I mean, part of our problem is younger people that go from, say, a townhome or an apartment or what have you to a single family home that may even have some acreage. There are people living in those houses with acreage that have been there for 20 or more years, longer than they anticipated. Their retirement took a hit, in 2008, hasn't recovered. The deferred maintenance is lowering the value of the property, and they see themselves in this sort of downward spiral where if they do sell, they're not going to make enough anyhow for what they need, to go to the next place. And I wonder about what companies like yours, what kind of an effect, if we do this right, they can have on inventory. Imagine a world where there's enough inventory of each category of housing where that sort of I don't know if that sort of eliminates the issues caused by phenomenon like short-term rentals, right? If you just simply had the sheer amount of inventory that you needed of various kinds of housing.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned tiny house in there, and I would want to kind of clarify, but also describe where our product falls in, because the idea of inventory is interesting too.
Yeah,
Like, where
please
does
do,
our
because you guys
product
have a
kind of
pretty wide vernacular,
fall
right?
into that? Yeah. So we're not a tiny house builder. I often view tiny houses as what they are. They're traditionally a small home that's built on a trailer. Our units are actually built on a chassis, steel chassis, but there are no wheels underneath. So
Mhm.
our units are actually built to completion in our facility and then shipped via rigger. So on a large flatbed trailer and either jacked up and rested down on site if we can move the trailer right to where the site is, or lifted with a crane and put in place. The advantage here is no on-site construction, so really it's just the site work, the stub ups of the electrical and the plumbing. um, we've always been, I mean, I actually kind of built the company on the idea that we would be providing wheels for these things, because it does create a really interesting option for customers where it could really tilt what your tax structure could actually look like for having the addition. It
Right.
could help with the permitting process. It can so having that option is one that we continue to look forward to. Also in financing, so instead of a mortgage, because it's a building, you could actually go with a commercial loan, which would be more like the trailer, tiny house, automobile kind of thing. So I love that gray area. Like that's where I like to be as a designer and a
Mm.
thinker, is like where you can find that space, because that's to me where there can be the creation of a place for a new solution. And that's really where I think we are. So we're not traditional builder, we're not tiny house builder,
Right.
we're kind of in between, in that space between. um, and it all goes towards the idea of, yeah, serving that mission of going, how do we create efficiencies in the way that we build? How do we reduce the kinds of, great variables that do happen with on-site construction? And how does that actually come back to our customer? So that actually is a lot of what bases that kind of affordable, price point for getting there.
Yeah, let's because you mentioned it earlier, and it is part of what we like to do here at the Are We Here Yet podcast, the unsexy stuff, right? Like financing and financial models. I mean, part of adding some flexibility here would be like, like right now, are these strictly a purchase option? Can people lease them? Like and what is your interest, right? What is yet to be written as far as like the financial model and the options that you give people, and how would that help you?
I mean, in terms of the vision, I love the idea of, the auto dealership, that we're actually creating these things. They go out on the lot. They could be available through a lease program. They could be purchased right off the lot. You could be purchasing a special order one that has more bells and whistles than you might want off the lot. So that to me is sort of generally where I've always envisioned the company being.
Hmm.
Right now, where we stand is that we are based in an order per spec system. So we work with our customers. We take a small deposit up front that goes towards the purchase of the price to essentially just lock in. We go through the design of the unit using all of our off the shelf options. And then we work with them to figure out how it will fit on their site, how it will deliver, connect them with, electrician, plumber that's needed to do the work. And then we go into the build process, delivery. So right now it's really based in that purchasing, but I do see great promise, and I love the idea of creating it really more like a commodity. So if someone wanted to upgrade,
Yeah.
right, this thing doesn't sit on a traditional foundation, so it just the same way it gets there, they could go, all right, my lease is up. I want to trade in my 320 square foot unit for a 440 square foot unit.
Yeah.
And, here's how we do it. So I think there are so many ideas and potential in the way that we kind of look at how we might evolve with those ideas in place, one of them being leasing.
Imagine a vibrant region that embraces innovative technology and systems, allowing individuals and businesses to grow and thrive within the natural and cultural lifestyle of Vermont. Imagine the Black River Innovation Campus. Our community includes business and technology programming, co-working and technology tools, and other exciting experiences that are quickly creating an outsized impact to our little corner of northern New England here in Springfield, Vermont. PC Mag rates Springfield, Vermont number 8 for the best work-from-home cities in the U.S. Join us in Vermont. Begin your journey at bricvt.org.
I think it's also interesting, the compatibility and comportability of your concept too. So in other words, you might own, right? Let's say you're not leasing and you do own and you want to expand over time. Like there's ways you can do that with these units that you might not necessarily in traditional balloon frame housing, it's going to cost you a lot more. But here's the particular thing. It's a lot more time, right? Because we're not talking about any sort of custom modular or prefabricated units, right? Even with traditional prefab, you're talking about, it just doesn't compare, right? As far as expense and the complexity to adding on. And I think that also speaks to just, when we think about the sheer amount of inventory that we need to bring on board in the United States, I mean, here just in Vermont alone, just to give our listeners a comparison, right? Jeff Chu at the Vermont Futures Project, they're talking about, minimum of say, 40,000 plus units of housing in 25 years. Depending on how you see that replacement rate too. I've got other folks that have been on the show. We've sort of and we're doing calculations ourselves, and it could be closer to like 75 plus in the same time period that are going to be needed when you factor in all of the replacement rate and so forth of existing inventory. And it's like, how are you going to get there? Because that's a short period of time to do that amount of housing and by the way, with a labor shortage and a knowledge shortage of being in the trades. So so I think solutions like yours seem to be pretty tasty when you think about let's get creative about how we deploy. Talk to us about getting once you've got an entitled property, right? You got your permits and so forth. You're free and clear to build. From the moment somebody orders from you, what's an estimated time frame to get to a cash flowable unit?
In terms of our production, right now we are able to crank out one of our units per month. And we have a small team, small, footprint, and it moves quick. The whole point of what we're doing really speaks to those big numbers because, this is about building a system that then is scalable, even to the point of being franchisable, because it's like, here's the kit, here's the files, here's all the fixtures that you need. And I hate it. It's a love-hate thing, but I love-hate comparing this to fast food restaurants, right? Because it's like, here's the thing that you have to do to make all of this work. And, the thing that I love about it is on our side, it ends up with a healthy quality product, versus that other evil of that other side. But it takes advantage of those same things, which is, okay, these are the materials that we use. We choose them because they're healthy. We choose them because they're abundant. We choose them because they are largely available locally. And, that can deliver a certain price point, a level of health, for our inhabitants, those kinds of things that all go into it. But it really comes down to, how do we go about that scaling process? So, we really get excited when we start to see the days where it's like, all right, I'm on the CNC machine. I cut, 35 sheets of plywood to create, 2 units worth of floor decks, and then the very next day, those 2 units of floor decks get assembled by 2 people in the shop. So this is where we start to see how those efficiencies and those things are moving forward. Um, so we do see it becoming, faster and faster.
Yeah.
And that's a really exciting thing. But right now we're in, we'll say from start to process to finish, it's 3 to 6 months, from the time that you've contacted us to, the lights are on, the heater, the air conditioning is running, and you're enjoying your
I mean,
space.
that's astounding.
Our structures are primarily made out of Advantech subflooring, which is very, readily available. It's a really flat, dimensionally stable material.
Yeah.
It sits on our machine bed really well, and we have a waffle construction, so it's not studs. It's actually studs and purlins, so it creates a
Hmm.
waffle.
Hmm.
So it's a matter of finding those ways to then kind of do that that higher end finish with a lower end kind of material. I was just looking at I take pride in every once in a while walking by the units and sort of catching my eye down the long wall just to see how perfectly flat that thing is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, and this goes to my, having said, you're building them like a brick shit house because,
Yeah.
they're the joinery is really good. The quality of the product you're putting into them. You're using a lot of locally sourced stuff too, like your insulation is coming from a place in Maine, which is kind of interesting and just an added sort of, another reason why you'd want to do business with you guys. It's a really local, or at least I fair to say regional play, right? You've got investors from Vermont, you've got Janice St. Onge and the people at the CDFI, Flex Capital, that have invested in your company. So for those of you outside of Vermont listening, right, who have always wanted to do business with a Vermont builder, here's your chance. It's innovative. It's well built. It's all Vermonters doing Vermonty stuff. I mean, what's there
Yeah,
not
and
to like?
we had an inquiry from a woman in LA that is, looking to move, as you said, she's looking to move out of her primary house,
Yeah.
build an ADU in the backyard, and then rent that unit out to a younger family because it's too big for her. So she reached out to us, and lo and behold, I was shocked. It was $8,000 to ship the thing from from Vermont
I mean,
to LA,
well, you
and
have people listening
they're
right now going, "Oh my God, $8,000!" But eight grand for a little house to go from here to there is pretty damn good, man. It's three
it's
thousand
pretty
miles.
good, and especially considering, I think of all the competition for what we're doing is all on the West Coast.
Yeah, 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 for
The
sure.
companies that are really looking at this kind of building, I mean, they're in Washington and Oregon and California and Wyoming and Nevada. It's like that's
Yeah,
where the hotbed of this kind of forward thinking about building ADUs, building smaller. And so really on our kind of East Coast side, there's fewer and far between, companies that are doing this. We certainly have a lot of traditional prefab modular, but not as many that are kind of working in this, delivers complete or semi-complete. um, and that is outside of the realm of mobile home, right? Because that's
yeah,
usually one of our first questions from a customer is like, how does this compare to a mobile home,
right,
something that you would see in that realm, and it doesn't. We are
right. It's
way
not a double
outside of
wide. Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
outside of that territory. And it's worth mentioning because it's typically a question that we get.
Well, that's interesting
But yeah.
because here's
Yeah.
why. Because when you look at some of the imagery of some of your units, right? A lot of people would be simply based on visuals. Yeah, because we all want to go back to what we know, right? We're trying to compare to something that we know, and that offers us a leverage point of perspective, right? So we look and say, oh, it looks like a double wide, or it looks like a trailer. So how much is the gravity, particularly here on the East Coast, how much is the gravity of culture play? When you talk to people here in New England, this is my experience with a former partner trying to do our own custom modular, right? Which is primarily a contemporary design of one kind or another. And people will say, I want something super energy efficient, and I want all kinds of interesting, water management systems. I want a compostable toilet, or I want a pyrolytic toilet. They want all the latest gadgetry, but then they want to do it in a 17th century salt box, or a 4/4 colonial. And it's like, well, sure, but it's not going to be as energy efficient as one of these custom modulars. Well, why not? Because that salt box was made, that was the high technology, right, of 1660, right? But in 1660, houses weren't expected even to be airtight. They were expected to have enough draft so that the fireplace wouldn't go out, right? So like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, how much is that either a challenge to you, or maybe nothing, in your experience of selling people on the idea of your?
Yeah. So we've we definitely see it all the time, and really we've had customers that go one way or the other. One, they love the kind of space shuttle look that our language, in terms of the materials that we use, the technology that we use to cut them, and the ways that we use to assemble them. And then we get customers that are like, I've got board and batten on my house, and I want it to match. So we've actually have our absolute base unit doesn't have any treatment on the exterior, so it's completely zip taped, zip system. And that affords the customer to then go, all right, I want to put the filigree, packed, gable roof on it, and clad it the way that I want to. So there can be that kind of DIY, match it, make it work, for your own context. And then, yeah, for our side, it really is going, okay, we want to create a durable, high performance shell. So this is how we are going to do that. And, this is the language for that. And, it really does put something else out into the marketplace that, isn't there as an option. And I know I see it really as, making this kind of dance work. I went to architecture school. I remember my junior year of undergrad, I built this house with the idea that it's like, if you stood in one corner, I consider my mom standing there, and my mom would look at this place and go, oh, I love it. And then if I stood on the other corner, I would look and I'd go, this is awesome. Like
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
this balance of saying, how do you work in the kind of traditional ways of viewing and valuing the kind of space that you're in, but at the same time go, wait a minute, this isn't quite right. So I always feel like it's got to be in that space. And I think when you go into the interiors and you see the way that these things are panelized, and you see the trim details, and, it all kind of hits you and goes, this isn't, the way I usually see this stuff. But then as you kind of, look less at the details, it doesn't become obtrusive. It
Yeah.
becomes something that you're already familiar with. So that's really what I'm hoping to do, is find that place between, so folks can do that. And I have to say, I've been thinking about the salt box ever since we first talked, because you mentioned the same concept then. And I'm kind of like, all right, how do I utilize those vernaculars and create a kind of language that works
Yeah.
for now, but actually uses the methods and materials and language that we have at our disposal. So I think those are important things, is to always be making that dance, because I love the Dymaxion house, right? The Buckminster Fuller,
100%.
this is the new home of the future. But everybody, that went and toured it was like, oh my, they're like vibrating, like, how far out of this realm that was. And even today, right, because this is the problem, we didn't adapt, or we didn't kind of move towards automated, factory based
Yeah.
industrial material, like we didn't move that way, so we're still dealing with the same problem Buckminster Fuller was dealing with, back in the day. So I find it to be a key part to how we're actually designing our units, is with that idea of balancing mom and me.
Yeah. Well,
In that way.
it's the idea that if it's I love, at once I love the idea that you have for, when we can broaden the spectrum of style and aesthetic, more people buy in, right? One interesting thing is when you finally see something that's truly contemporary in nature, in an actual physical space where it's been installed, and you start to live there, and you start to live with the house itself, right? At the same time, you're also living with the house in nature. You start to realize it's this whole other aesthetic language at work, which is better for the future, which is better for putting more of these kind of houses out into the world, for all of the positive reasons we've talked about: increasing inventory faster, accessibility from a price standpoint, accessibility from an inventory standpoint, all of these things that contribute positively to the housing crisis that we're in. I think we can only
Yeah, and
predict the best we can predict.
you have to add climate crisis to it, because
Yeah.
the idea of building a house on a 8 foot deep foundation doesn't make sense. So this idea that this thing can actually be put down light on the land and relocated. I
Yeah.
mean, this is going back to having the snail on your back, or the wagon train, right? This
Yeah.
is something that allows us to, you know as you're saying, build that inventory, but don't lock it in a way that it actually can't evolve with the climate issues that we're dealing with. And I think that's another part that I see us really engaging, because we're looking at, all right, what is our flood resilient foundation for our units? What is the system, and how we can create it so it can be moved more readily? Because those things are questions that we know we have those problems, but looking at it now in our kind of early generation of how we build our units, um, is only about that foresight of seeing how it's going to impact us even more and more in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder when you're in a state like we are, where the only place, for the most part, that our cities and towns have been built, especially, so most of our cities and towns, the core of them, are in the only flat places that there are in a mountainous state, which 9 times out of 10 is next to a body of water of some kind.
We had our flood July 11th. We had 42 inches of water in our production space and offices. And then we were just getting ourselves up and running. Our machine, actually, our CNC machine was hit. So it was down for 7 months. And the day we got it fully running, December 18th, another major flood
Oh, that's
event
right.
in
Oh,
Johnson.
yeah.
And the high mark of the flood was, get this, 42 inches less than July 11th. So the water hit right at the top edge of our property. I mean, it was just like amazing that if it rained another 3-4 hours, we would
You
have
would have
had
been under, yeah.
4 to 6 inches in the space again. So that idea that everybody's going, okay, after July 11th, it's 100 years, it's 100 years, we don't have to worry about it. Well, it was only December 18th later,
Yeah.
where I was worried. I mean, I was there with the headlights on, facing the river and watching it, and it's real. And this is the kind of thing that we've got to start looking at the new ways that we're going to develop, and that's really where I see us, finding that purchase, finding that place for us to innovate and come up with solutions. I certainly don't think our way of building will be the way. I mean, it's a way to infill, it's a way to accessorize. It's sort of this secondary approach at figuring out how to build inventory. And I think for us, it's kind of like start small. It's like that's why
Yeah.
I wanted to start with the office. It's four walls, it's some electric, it's heat, and we get good at doing that. And
Yeah,
now we're
smart.
sort of in
Yeah.
our second phase where it's like it's a one-bedroom unit with a kitchen and a bathroom, and we're going to get good at doing that. And then it's kind of moving on from there.
Well, folks, I want to let you know we're gonna have all the information so you can access all the good info on Upend This on the episode page for this episode when it goes live. Mike Zebrowski, Upend This is the company, and Mike, I'm really glad we had a chance to talk tonight on the Are We Here Yet podcast.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.